Growing up in East London, being tough wasn't a choice, it was a survival tactic. The streets were unforgiving and every corner held a new challenge. Her voice, roughened by years and cigarettes, held the echo of that truth. Each word she spoke was a testament to the battles fought and the resilience built. East London wasn't for the faint of heart. It chewed you up and spat you out, leaving you hardened or broken. The streets were a relentless teacher, imparting lessons of survival and grit, mostly broken. The girl who'd one day be known as the Shadow learned that young. She understood early on that vulnerability was a luxury she couldn't afford. Cobblestone streets weren't charming, they were treacherous after dark. Each step was a calculated risk, each shadow a potential threat. Boarded-up buildings weren't quaint, they held whispers of violence and despair. They were silent witnesses to the struggles and stories of those who had come before. Even the air, thick with soot and the tang of the nearby docks, felt heavy, like it was sitting on you, daring you to rise above it. It was a constant reminder of the harsh reality that enveloped the area. She'd learned to fight before she learned to read. Her fists became her language, her means of communication in a world that demanded strength. A shove in the schoolyard, a snatched purse, disrespect from older lads who thought a girl was easy pickings. Each encounter was a test, a challenge to her growing resilience. Each scuffle, each narrow escape chipped away at the fear, replaced it with something colder, harder. Her heart became a fortress, her mind a strategic battlefield. It was survival, like she said, but surviving in that concrete jungle came with a price. It demanded sacrifices, and it took pieces of her soul in return. It changed you, turned your heart a little colder, your gaze a little sharper. The innocence of childhood was replaced with the steely resolve of a survivor. By the time she was a teenager, the streets had claimed her, molded her into something dangerous. She was no longer just a girl, she was a force to be reckoned with, a product of her environment. There was a rhythm to the East End underworld, a pulse that drew you in like a siren song, impossible to ignore. Pubs with dim lights and even dimmer clientele, where deals were struck and scores were settled, often with a handshake or a nod. Back alleys where stolen goods changed hands, the air thick with tension and the scent of desperation. And always the constant threat of violence simmering just below the surface, ready to erupt at any moment. She fell in with a crew led by a bloke named Danny the Knife Murphy, a name that sent shivers down spines. His reputation preceded him, a dangerous cocktail of charm and brutality that few could resist or challenge. He saw something in her, a spark of ruthlessness that mirrored his own, a potential that he could mold. She started small, running errands, delivering messages that couldn't be trusted to a phone, each task a test of her loyalty. Each task, each foray deeper into that world, felt like a betrayal of the girl she'd been, the girl who once had dreams. But that girl, the one who dreamed of escaping the East End, was fading fast, replaced by someone harder, colder, replaced by someone who moved with a predator's grace, who could look a man twice her size in the eye and make him back down without a word. She was good at what she did, too good, her skills honed to a razor's edge. The thrill of a successful heist, the adrenaline rush of a close call, it was intoxicating. Dangerous, but intoxicating, a high she couldn't resist. And with each success, the line between right and wrong blurred a little more, until it was barely visible at all, lost in the shadows of the East End. Blood didn't mean much in their world, loyalty did. The crew became her family, Danny the Knife, her surrogate brother, her mentor in the art of survival. They had each other's backs, no questions asked. It was a bond forged in shared danger, in the knowledge that they were all each other had. There was a twisted sense of camaraderie, of belonging, that she'd never found elsewhere. Late nights spent huddled around a table in a dingy flat, dividing up the spoils of a robbery, sharing cigarettes and dark humor. Moments of tenderness too, a hand on her shoulder after a particularly harrowing job, a gruff word of praise from Danny. They were her family, but they were also her prison. The deeper she fell into that life, the harder it became to imagine a way out. The streets had a way of claiming you, of making you believe that this was all you were good for, all you'd ever be. Loyalty, once a source of strength, began to feel like a noose tightening around her neck. Danny, always ambitious, always pushing the limits, got involved in a turf war with a rival gang. The violence escalated quickly, from slashed tires and broken bones to something far more sinister. She found herself caught in the crossfire, forced to make impossible choices. Protect her own, even if it meant crossing lines she'd never crossed before. Stay loyal to Danny, even as his ambition threatened to consume them all. One rainy night, the feud reached its bloody climax. A warehouse raid gone wrong, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. She saw a side of herself that night that she never wanted to see again. A cold, calculating killer who did what had to be done to survive. They walked away victorious, but the victory felt hollow. The streets were painted red with the blood of enemies and allies alike. And somewhere in the chaos, the girl she'd been, the one who'd clung to some sliver of hope for a different life, finally died. Word spread like wildfire through the East End underworld. The Shadow, they called her, a whisper of a name, spoken with fear and grudging respect. She was Danny's right hand, ruthless and efficient, feared for her quick thinking and even quicker trigger finger. Heists became bolder, the stakes higher. Jewelry stores, banks, even a daring raid on an armored car carrying a king's ransom in diamonds. The thrill of the chase, the satisfaction of outsmarting the authorities, it was addictive. She amassed a small fortune, but money held no allure. Not anymore. It was just a way to keep score, a tangible reminder of how far she'd come from the girl who'd once dreamed of escaping the East End. But with every successful job came increased scrutiny. The police were getting closer, their methods more sophisticated. Rivals, envious of their success, circled like sharks, sensing blood in the water. The pressure was mounting, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The spoils of her criminal life, the expensive clothes, the penthouse apartment overlooking the Thames, couldn't mask the emptiness that gnawed at her soul. The nightmares started soon after the warehouse raid, vivid flashes of that night, the smell of blood and gunpowder clinging to her like a shroud. She tried to outrun the guilt, to drown it in cheap whiskey and even cheaper company, but it was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. The faces of those she'd hurt, those she'd killed, haunted her every waking moment. Relationships were impossible. She was too guarded, too damaged to let anyone get close. The only people she allowed herself to care about were her crew, her surrogate family. But even those bonds were strained, frayed by years of violence and betrayal. The thought of leaving the life, of escaping the clutches of the East End, was a constant whisper in the back of her mind. It was a dream she dared not speak aloud, a fragile hope that seemed impossible in the harsh reality she lived. But where would she go? Who would she be without the Shadow? The identity she had built, though dark and dangerous, was all she knew. The streets had a way of claiming you, of making you believe that this was all you were good for, all you'd ever be. They whispered lies of worthlessness, binding you to a fate you never chose. One day, a botched robbery, a careless mistake by one of their own, changed everything. It was a moment of chaos that shattered the fragile balance of her world. She found herself staring down the barrel of a police officer's gun. the cold steel a reflection of the emptiness she felt inside. In that instant, time seemed to freeze, and she saw her life flash before her eyes. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something other than fear or adrenaline. She felt hope. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was there, a light in the darkness. The trial was a media circus, her face plastered across every newspaper in the country. The public was hungry for a villain, and she fit the role perfectly. They called her a monster, a menace to society. The headlines screamed for justice, painting her as irredeemable. And maybe they were right. She had done terrible things, things she could never take back. But as she sat in that courtroom listening to the evidence against her, she realized that she didn't want to be that person anymore. She wanted to change, to find redemption. The judge sentenced her to 10 years in prison. It was a heavy sentence, but it felt like a chance to start over. As they led her away, she felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of her past was heavy, but the possibility of a future, a different future, gave her strength. Prison was her punishment, but it was also her chance. A chance to break free from the cycle of violence, to atone for her sins, to reclaim the piece of her soul that she thought was lost forever. In the confines of her cell, she found a strange kind of freedom. It was a place to reflect, to heal, and to plan for a future where she could finally be free, not just from the East End, but from the shadows of her own making.